Welcome to Sabbath School at Chapel Oaks. We're just really glad you're here. Good morning to those of you. We have about, looks like 12 people online today as well. And so looking forward to a great Sabbath School lesson study together from the book of Isaiah. I'm a winter guy, so yesterday I loved it. Just watching all this horizontal snow go by and wondering, Becky and I were talking yesterday a little bit about our moms who didn't have clothes dryers, and they would wash their clothes and then they would hang them out on the line. And yesterday would have been an interesting day. I think our clothes would have ended up in New Jersey or something by the end of the day, based on that west wind that we had. So I hope that you all managed to stay warm and comfortable, and that I'm glad you got here safely this morning. We're in the book of Isaiah. And as some of you know by now, it is my favorite book of the Bible. And every time I open it, I've learned something new and exciting that I didn't know before. And so this week, it was no exception. Spent some time this week trying to tie all the minor prophets together with Isaiah and Jeremiah and when they lived and when they spoke. Because you don't really think of, when you study Isaiah and maybe Second Chronicles and Second Kings, but Micah is during that time, and Nahum is during that time, and some other prophets are during that time. And so to tie them all together to see what they had to say to both Judah and Israel during that time has been a real blessing to me. So next week we'll talk about how all those prophets fit together with Isaiah and how that works. We're delighted this morning to have August back from sunny Florida, and he's going to be running our microphone. And how are we going to advance the slides? Can you do that from here? Oh, good morning, Monica. Oh, I couldn't see her. So good. So if we want to go to our first slide, let's. Does anyone have a prayer request they'd like to mention this morning before we start? I know this isn't a great format for that with, the big congregation and online and everything, but anybody have anybody they want to pray for? Yes, sir.
I have a nephew who's about 45 years old that's in ICU.
He's what?
He's in the ICU in Nebraska. Anyway, he's in very serious condition.
Okay, what's his name?
His name is Cole, C-O-L-E.
Okay, you want to pray for Cole this morning. And
thank you.
Okay, so family of family of Shirley Lynn. I'd like to pray for my brother. As some of you know, he woke up the Sunday before Christmas, and his wife, who was 63 years old, had passed away in the night in bed with him, and for no apparent reason. So his name is Ron, and so we'll pray for him again this morning. Pretty tough to have Christmas present under your tree from you and your spouse, and then, anyway, Don.
My parents, Don and Pat, are both not doing well.
Okay, we will pray for them. Anyone else? All right, well, let's pray together. Lord, thank you so much for inviting us to worship you on Sabbath morning. It's such a privilege to be here. And Lord, we have several requests we want to bring to you this morning. We want to pray for Cole. He's as you know, he's in the ICU in Nebraska and very sick. And we ask that you will put your healing hand on him, give the physicians, the nurses extraordinary skill as they're working to take care of him this morning. We want to be with the family of Shirley Lynn. They're, that when you lose a loved one, and especially at this sort of, at Christmas, New Year's time, it's really, really difficult. And we wanted to ask you this: just send your spirit, have your angels just do extra time with them today. We ask that you will be with Don's parents, Sean and Pat. The challenges of aging, but you've promised to be with us all the way to the end. Then we'd like to pray for my brother Ron today as well, that you will give him peace as he struggles to deal with losing his wife. Lord, in the midst of a country that's divided, help us to be peacemakers, and bring people together in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so we'll start off with where we're going to start off every time that I'm going to be teaching this quarter, and that's what I call diamonds from Isaiah. So let me tell you, ask you, are diamonds hard to get or easy to get? Hard to get, right? You don't find them very many places, right? You find them in Africa. I think you find them some places in Russia. They're not found very many places around the earth. You got to dig hard for them. And I'm calling these diamonds from Isaiah. These are sort of things that are outside the lesson of this week, but I think are really valuable things. So the first one we'll talk about is Isaiah chapter 30, verses 18 through 21. And why this spoke to me this week is that sometimes you're trying to figure out what to do. You know, where to go, what to do, how to do it. And there's a really good promise in here that makes a real difference. And so I'm just going to read it, starting in verse 18. So the Lord must wait for you to come to him so he can show you his love and compassion. For the Lord is a faithful God. Blessed are those who wait for his help. O people of Zion who live in Jerusalem, you will weep no more. He will be gracious if you ask for help. He will surely respond to the sound of your cries. Though the Lord gave you adversity for suffering and for food and suffering for drink, he will still be with you to teach you. You will see your teacher with your own eyes. And here's the section that really sort of hit me. Your own ears will hear him. Right behind you, a voice will say, this is the way you should go, whether to the right or to the left. What a great promise, you know, that God's going to be with us. And sometimes it's you know, and all during your life, you know, you people, when you're younger, what you know, the choice of a career, should you take this job? Should you move here? Should you do this? What about the looking for a spouse and choice of a spouse and who to marry? And then as you continue, how to raise your children, and then how to do other things in your life. And you will hear this voice behind you saying, this is the way, walk in it. Is that Paul? Good morning, Paul. Welcome. So if you don't know Paul, you should meet Paul. Paul's a good friend, good man, and you cannot talk with Paul without smiling. So the second verse is Isaiah 40, 9 through 11. You probably know by now, Isaiah 40 is my favorite chapter in the Bible, and it has this great section, and the Messiah has a section from it, and we'll just read the verse 11. He will feed his flock like a shepherd. He will carry the lambs in his arms, holding them close to his heart. He will gently lead the mother sheep with their young. How many of you this morning want to be close to God's heart? I want to be there. So this has been, you know, as some of you know, this has been a really tough year at the Barts house. We've had 2 major fractures, 2 major surgeries. My mom passed away, my brother's wife passed away. And on Friday this week, I was thinking, God, I just want to use Sabbath as a reset button. Just reset all that stuff out there, reset my body, my mind, and my spirit to be just reset this week. And this verse really hit it, that God carries us close to his heart. And I'm really glad that he carries us close to his heart. And then the third diamond this week is that in Isaiah 42, and he says that in verses 1 through 4, he's talking about Jesus coming. This is, you know, Isaiah has a lot of prophecies about Jesus. And this verse number 3, he will not crush the weakest reed or put out a flickering candle. He will bring justice to all who have been wronged. Anybody ever had a week where you felt like you were kind of a crushed reed or a flickering candle? Anybody ever been a flickering candle? Some of my weeks I've been a flickering candle, not a strong flame. And for him to say, God is not going to put out a flickering candle. Just because you're having a tough time, he doesn't go, well, you know, the survival of the fittest is not God's way, right? He doesn't go, well, you're not measuring up, so off with you. You're struggling. We don't need you anymore. That's not God's way. So there's a God that's close to that carries us close to his heart. All right. Well, Monica, can we have the next slide, please? And I'm hoping this comes out. Oh, the slide comes out okay. and see how hard it is to read. Not too bad. Okay, good. So here we have in the book of Isaiah, Isaiah chapter 7, which we're going to be in today. Entitled this section, everywhere. So let's take a look at this map. I've always been really interested in geography, and I've always been interested in how geography affects history. And geography really affects history, and it affects how the Bible. It really affects how Judah and Israel interacted with other nations, with the nations around them. Now, if you look at this map, what's the key geographical feature of this map in terms of where Israel was put? Why did God put Israel where He did, where He put it? What were they supposed to be? They're right. They're kind of right in the middle, right? So if you think about the trade routes, the powerful nations of the day were Assyria, Babylon, Egypt, Ethiopia. And so the trade through the world went through Israel. And so, yes, God wanted them to be materially wealthy, or materially comfortable, so they didn't have to starve. But on the other hand, what He really wanted them to do is to be in a position where they could spread the gospel. And so He put them there so that all these caravans that were coming through, so there was a way of the sea, which kind of went along the coast and then up through where Damascus is and then over toward Babylon. And then there was the King's Highway, which went on the east side through Edom and Moab, and on the east side up toward Damascus, and then cut over as well. So, good morning, Johnny. And so those two major highways, there was a massive amount of trade that went through them. And that was a great opportunity for them to spread the gospel to people north and south and east and west, because they passed through there. But this also put them in the midst of a bunch of countries who by now, by 740 years before Christ, are hostile. This is a very hostile environment. Okay, so on the southwest, you have Egypt. Egypt is always strong, almost always strong, and always wants to chip away at the southern borders of Israel. In fact, right after Solomon died and Rehoboam became king, Shishak, who was the Pharaoh of Egypt, came marching through, and Solomon had so much money that he had made shields of gold and had put them in his palace. I don't know, several hundred, I think, shields of gold, and put them in the palace. And Shishak said, wow, Israel looks a little weak to me right now. I'm coming up. And so he did, and he captured Jerusalem, and he took those shields of gold and took them back to Egypt with him. So Egypt was always a threat. And then right now, during this point, remember, David had subdued the Philistines completely, had taken away all their political power, had captured them, and so they were not a threat anymore. But now, with Judah becoming weak, the Philistines decide to rise up again, and they start picking off territory on the west. The Edomites down here on the southeast had been subdued by David and Joab, but they were also and actually enslaved by Solomon. But they rebelled and they took back some of their territory. On the north, Israel and Syria, the Bible calls it Aram, were beginning to attack the nation of Judah from the north. And then you have this big black cloud, and I put it in large type on the top, and that's the country of Assyria. If you want to read some depressing information about a country, read about Assyria. These were awful human beings. And so if you look over a period of about 100 years, they were attacking either Israel or Israel and Judah consistently during that time. And finally, they ended up, and we're going to talk more about this next week, they ended up capturing Israel. And when the Assyrians captured you, they did something that other countries didn't do when they captured you. If the Egyptians captured you, they wanted you to stay where you were. They just wanted you to produce a lot of money so they could collect their tribute and send their money down to Egypt. Even the Babylonians, the same way. If the Babylonians captured you, you pretty much kept your local religion and so on. They just wanted you to make sure the tribute money went off to Babylon. When the Assyrians captured you, it was fruit basket upset. The Assyrians would come in and they would take all the people in that area and transport them to some other part of their empire, and then they would take the people from that part of the empire and haul them down to the country that they had taken over. So there wasn't the Assyrians' theory about government was, look, we're not going to leave a remnant of people here who can foment rebellion. We're going to haul them all out of here, and we're going to send them off, and we're going to bring them. We're going to bring the people from other areas back who have who aren't going to stir things up. Interesting story when we'll read more about next week about what happens to Israel when that happened. But anyway, so Assyria is always trouble, and they end up, as we'll see in a few weeks, they end up attacking Jerusalem. And in fact, there was an event that happened in Jerusalem after they had already taken over Israel, an event that happened in Jerusalem that basically put them back far enough so that it opened the door for Babylon to take over and be the superpower instead of Assyria. So, that's a lot of stuff that God had to do with as we see that. So there's trouble everywhere. Trouble from the south, from the southwest, trouble from the southeast, trouble from the west, trouble from the north, trouble from the northeast. So all those directions. And here is Ahaz, the son of Jotham, sitting down here waiting for more bad stuff to happen. So King Ahaz. If you could open your Bible to 2 Kings chapter 16. And I'd like you to August, if you could give Becky if you could take the mic over to Becky. And Becky, would you mind reading verses 1 through 4? Remember, he had followed, his father was Jotham, who was a follower of God. And so Ahaz becomes king when he's 20 years old. And so let's read about the beginning of his reign.
Ahaz, son of Jotham, began to rule over Judah in the 17th year of King Pekah's reign in Israel. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. He did not do what was pleasing in the sight of the Lord his God, as his ancestor David had done. Instead, he followed the example of the kings of Israel, even sacrificing his own son in the fire. In this way, he followed the detestable practices of the pagan nations of the Lord had driven from the land ahead of the Israelites. He offered sacrifices and burned incense at the pagan shrines and on the hills and under every green tree. Okay,
so what kind of king is Ahaz? Thank you, Becky. What kind of king is Ahaz in terms of a follower of God? And so that's the first question. That's an easy question to answer. But the question I have is, and I'd like to have some responses. Why do all of these kings want to follow these other gods from the surrounding country? When Jehovah had led them opened the Red Sea, led them across the wilderness, stopped the River Jordan, been responsible for the defeat of all the tribes in Israel, and blessed David and the beginning of Solomon's reign so abundantly, what's the attraction from all these other gods? Attractive enough that, hey, Johnny, you would take Emily and Julie and sacrifice them in the fire. What's the attraction? Why? Why are they going Ashtoreth and Baal and Molech and etc.?
They wanted the same success that the other nations were apparently having. So they believed that their gods were powerful and were giving them the prosperity, so they wanted to have the same. And it's interesting because you said all of that God had done for them, and they apparently forgot about that. And I believe it's when you start comparing what you have with others, you always feel, because Satan is right there to help you feel that, oh, they have more. That's better. You know, it's always green on the other side of the fence. So I want to have what they have. And we don't experience in our personal lives what they were experiencing there. But today we have social media, which helps us to be unhappy what we have, and desire what other people have as well.
Okay, good. That's a great thought. You know, so not that you're necessarily comparing, but it's almost that the social media of today is the Ashtoreth and Baal of yesterday, because so if you get on Instagram or if you get on Facebook, and I'm not a Facebook guy, we have a bicycle group. Morning, Jay. We have a bicycle group in Baser, and they put the bike ride announcements on Facebook. So that's my total bit of Facebook, because I just can't do social media. But the pictures that every so often I see, or some email it to me or whatever, or Instagram, people don't go, let me put my laundry that I did today on Instagram, or let me talk about the crabgrass that's taking over my backyard, or let me talk about my tomato blight, So you don't, or let me tell you how bad things are with whatever, with my marriage or with my relatives or whatever. No, that doesn't happen. So social media tells you about all those things that are wonderful and helps you begin to covet what other people have. Bill?
Well, they wanted unity for the common good because nobody wants bickering forever. And there was constantly going on, said, let's find our common denominator and we can create unity and everybody can live in peace. We'll all be happy and we'll all have, a one world kingdom that we can all get along. And let's face it, that's what we're looking at today. Come on, let's not close our eyes to what's going on in the world. Unity for the common good, which transcends, and you have to compromise a lot of things for the common good. And that's what we're having today in our country. Yeah,
and Solomon, remember, August, Lyle has his hand up, and so we'll get to him in a second. We taught a class this week for Pathfinders on the kings, and there were like 3 or 4 things that God said back in Deuteronomy. When you get a king, when you get in to settle down in Canaan, you're going to ask for a king, and it's a bad idea. But when you ask for a king, I'm going to let you have a king. But here's the rules for the king. Number 1, and it's a short list of rules. Number 1, take the book of the law, copy it yourself by hand, and read it every day. Okay, that's the things you have to do. The things you are not supposed to do are go back to Egypt and buy horses, amass a whole bunch of money, and marry a whole bunch of women. That's the list, okay? And especially marry a whole bunch of women who are from other nations. Oh, and the other thing is you can't be a foreigner. You have to be an Israelite. So the kings proceeded to not do the stuff he said to do, and they proceeded to do all the stuff that he said not to do. So one of the things Solomon did is he decided that having more than one wife was a really good idea. So how many did he have? Do you remember? Yeah, so 700 wives and 300 concubines. Okay, so 1,000 people, Bill, to give him instructions about who he ought to worship. The lowest common denominator there is really going to be low. So go ahead, Lyle, and we'll come back to Bill.
Along with your other question, maybe it was like fire insurance, covering all his bases. He wanted to make sure he had all these other gods happy too, and on his side.
So, that's a really good point. And here's a little story, I think, that illustrates that. As you know, Christianity typically is a monotheistic religion, right? We want to believe that, or we believe that there's just one God, right? Hinduism, for example, is fine with lots and lots of gods. And so when I was at Vista Adventist Hospital in Denver, we wanted to have we had a lot of babies born in our hospital. We had, for a 100-bed hospital, we had 2,200 births a year. That's a lot of babies to be born. And so what we did is we asked our chaplain, we said, look, we want you to go and have a blessing with every one of these new moms. Okay, sit down with them and say, would you like us to pray a special blessing on you and your new baby and your family as you start this new chapter in your life? And almost everybody said yes. But some people would say no. And some people would say, well, let me think about it. So if you divide the religions into Hinduism, Muslim, Christianity, and Judaism, and Buddhism. Those are the 5 major religions. Because we were in Boulder County, Colorado, which is a very diverse group of people, and especially very diverse from a religious standpoint. Who do you think always said yes, no matter what? Would be the Christians, the Hindus, the Jews, the Muslims. Who always said yes? The Hindus, because they figure that they've got a zillion gods, so let's just cover our bases. We got a couple more, we're going to cover the bases there, and we're going to be, they'll give us just a little more insurance. So, Bill.
In a sense, they said, look, we'll give you our women, you marry them, and we'll marry your children, we'll intermarry them, and you're not going to go to war with your family. You're not going to go kill your children. And so, they did that in the Dark Ages as well. I mean, that was a pretty common practice, even, in the New Testament period. Intermarry, and then you won't go kill your own family, so we'll all get along. We'll all be one big happy family. And by the way, what's interesting, they gave Solomon his first wife, and she was genuinely converted. And he said, this is great. I'll marry all these women and all be converted to our God. And this really, we saw what happened. They converted him to their God. And so it just don't work.
Okay, so any other thoughts about why Israel seemed to be attracted by the gods around them instead of following Jehovah? Becky? I always have questions about this because from the very beginning, Moses and Joshua both say, we're going to get to this land and you guys are going to leave God. I know you are. I mean, Joshua said, people, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord, but I know what's going to happen to the rest of you. You're going to be chasing after all the gods around you within about 15 minutes after I die. And guess what? The whole book of the Judges is this list of what happens after people leave God. Becky?
I don't wonder why they chased other gods any more than I wonder why we do.
So expand on that.
Well, I mean, don't we want things that we shouldn't have as well?
Okay, so let's talk about that a minute. Why do we chase the gods we chase? What are the gods we chase? Pardon me? Money, okay? We chase money. Power, okay? I mean, for me, that's the one, okay? Power. And I found myself, because some of you know I used to be a hospital CEO, I found myself, that was a daily struggle to not have inappropriate exercise of power. What's the saying that one of the British Prime Minister said, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Power corrupts. It's almost impossible. I mean, if you look at the list of people in Congress who started out middle class and who for the last 20 years have been making $125,000 a year and had to live in Washington, D.C. and at home and carry 2 households, and when they get out of Congress 20 years later, they're worth $20 million. Something doesn't work that way. The math doesn't work anyway. So, yeah, so power corrupts in that situation. Lyle.
Some people maybe pursue their jobs and their status more than they do the Lord too.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to have everybody hear that comment. So.
Yeah, maybe some people pursue their jobs more than they do the Lord, their status, you know.
Okay. Anybody here ever worship their job? I have. Becky has. Becky loved to teach. Okay, Becky would say, I would do it for free. Now, don't tell the school board that because they might take her up on it. But she would say, I love teaching so much that she would spend, 50, 60 hours a week teaching or getting ready to teach because it was just, and it could become it can become a god. Anything else? So we talked about power, we talked about success, we talked about money, we talked about jobs. All those really good things can have us worship those gods. Yeah. Hey, Johnny.
You have to remember that there was never the plan for the people of Israel to have a king, right? That was never God's plan because he knew what we know now, and he didn't want that to happen. But they were looking in that time so much to the other around them, to the other nations, that they wanted to fit in. They wanted to have a king. And they had a king, and then we know what happened. And I think this is the reason why we pursue other kings, other idols in our hearts. It's because we are replacing or displacing God as our main, the center of our lives. Every time that God is not the center, we are going to go after idols.
How easy is it to do that, to not have God be the center of your life? Wow, there's so many things around that cause that.
I was going to say that when you put your faith in a person, then it totally takes away God. You put away God, and that's why one of the expanding what Regina just said, that's why God never intended to have king for Israel, because he wants him to be, he wants the people to have faith on him, not on the person, and that's I think was one of the reasons too that's why they lost their path all the time, and that's why they lost their path since the beginning in Exodus when they came out and they wanted to worship, that idol. So it's just from the beginning they just wanted to want more and more and more, but because they just wanted one more because they didn't have enough faith in God, on what God could give them to them. Of course, there is a lot of things that we do a lot of mistakes, and a lot of things we do wrong. That's why sometimes we don't have what we're supposed to be having, in life. But other than that, it's just we have another spot. We got Satan too, who doesn't make it easier on us. He doesn't. It makes life easier for a lot of us. So that's another thing too. Sometimes we just try the hardest we can, and it's just Satan is just right there. It's not gonna leave you alone. And why? Because he doesn't want you to have faith in God. He wants you to have who look around and say, well, why he's doing that, and and he wants you to put the faith on and do wrong things so you can prosper too. And it's not just that case. it's one of them, but it's some more things too.
So, I think you've made several really good points, and what really resonates with me is this whole idea of putting something first instead of God. I think that maybe that's why the first commandment is, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." Because if you get that one right, the rest of them you can kind of you'll get there eventually. But that first one, if you ignore the first one, the rest of them are pretty hard to do. And I was thinking, I got out on my road bike this last week for a first long ride not long, but 18-mile long. So I rode, and I went by a new subdivision that they're putting together out in Leavenworth County, and they're really big houses. I mean, they're big, nice houses. And I was driving by, I thought, well, wow, look at all those really nice houses. And I was thinking, because last night for once, I was really trying to be really introspective and trying to use this Sabbath for a reset button for my body, mind, and spirit. And I thought I was riding by those houses, and I didn't think, I wonder what the people are like that are living in those houses, or I wonder who's moving in there, or whatever. It was like, wow, those are really nice houses. Wow. And so the next step is, wow, those are really nice houses. I wonder if I should buy one of those lots and put a really nice house in there too. And then, then you're down the road, right? Not that it's bad to have a nice house, but if that's what I'm thinking of I'm putting that in front of God, then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, that's not really where I want to go. So it's easy. It's easy to go down that road when you have some other God in front of God. Or if you don't put him first. I think you have to actively put him first, right? You can't just say, God, you're first. Now leave me alone this week while I go do my thing. I don't think it doesn't work that way for me. Any other thoughts about why the Israelites chased other gods? Bill, you have one other thought here.
It's kind of sinful human nature. We get power, and the real reason that we're put into positions of authority is to serve the people that we represent. And every time it's reversed, and we get into power, and the people serve us, and that's exactly what goes on over and over and over again. And the devil said God doesn't serve anybody; he just sits there on the throne, and we serve him day and night. And Jesus came and proved that my Father is the greatest servant. He serves incessantly day and night. You can't outserve God. He serves his created order over and over and over. And so the devil is defeated. God is the greatest ruler, but he's also the greatest servant. And we see that down through history, no, I'm now in authority. You serve me. And that's so in our political scenario, where they're elected to serve the people, and by the time they get done, they want the people to serve them.
Yeah.
What's going on in Washington right now is a power struggle. Everybody's looking for their place to have power in Washington right now.
Is it government by the government of the other government and for the government? Something like that. I don't want to. Yes.
Struggle.
Yeah, and politics tends to attract that, doesn't it? Okay, so let's turn to Isaiah chapter 7 and get into the heart of what's going on this week. So remember, you've got all the political stuff going on. You've got Ahaz, who doesn't care about God, who leads the people astray, who, by the way, closes the temple. This is a guy not only just kind of, doesn't just put God first, but this is the kind of guy who actively puts these other gods first. And this is a guy who shucks off God, Jehovah, and says, I'm done with you. I'm shutting the temple down. And so he is, he's really actively working against God. And so God, though, back to Bill's point, God is a loving, supportive, humble God, and is willing to say, even though this guy has just completely trashed me and doesn't care about me, I'm going to send my prophet to talk to him. Because what's the problem in the first two verses? What are we got? What's going on here? Remember, we've got Ahaz, who's the son of Jotham, who's the son of Uzziah, son of a good guy. He's 20 years old, a young guy, and he's really scared because what's going on? Who's going to attack him? We can go back to our map. Who's going to attack him? The Israelites are going to attack him, and Aram's going to attack him. Aram, which is now we're basically Syria. So Syria and Israel are getting ready to attack him. Okay, and so he's worried about how worried is he about? Look at verse 2. The news came to them and came to the royal court of Judah. Syria is allied with Israel against us. So the hearts of the king and his people trembled like fear, tremble with fear, like trees shaking in a storm. Great imagery. So he's filled with courage, right? No, he's not. He's a scared kid that is way out of his depth, doesn't know what to do, and the two countries north of him are getting ready to attack him. So what does God do? God says to Isaiah, he says, go take your son, and I can't pronounce his name, by the way. I think it's something like Shir-Jasub, and go out and meet King Ahaz. I'm going to tell you where to find him. He's out at the end of the aqueduct. He's by this vineyard. He's over beyond the corner. If you go out there and find him, he'll be right there. So Isaiah goes out there, takes his son, goes out there, and there he is. And he sits down with him, and he says, look, don't worry about these guys, because if you stick with the Lord, God's not going to let them do anything to you. So God says this will never happen. He says, Syria is not stronger than its capital Damascus. Damascus is no stronger than its king Rezin. As for Israel, it will be crushed within 65 years. It was no stronger than Samaria, and its capital, and Samaria is no stronger than its king Pekah. But then he says at the end, unless your faith is firm, I cannot make you stand firm. So what's God saying to him? You got two nations that are coming after you. They're going to attack you. If you stick with me, nothing's going to happen. But unless you stick with me, I can't fulfill that promise. Okay, so here's a great conversation that goes on. So the Lord sends a message to King Ahaz. Ask the Lord for a sign, Ahaz. Ask God for a sign that this is really going to happen. And so here's what Ahaz's answer is. No, I don't really want to test the Lord like that. I want to think about the irony of this, right? Here's Ahaz, who has completely abandoned God, doesn't care what God thinks, and he says to God's prophet, well, I don't really want to bother God. Really? You don't want to bother God. Even though he's the one thing that can keep these two nations from attacking you, you don't want to bother him. Okay, so Isaiah says then to him, look, isn't it, you royal family of David, isn't it enough to exhaust human patience? Must you exhaust the patience of God as well? And then he gives this prophecy. He says, a virgin will conceive and bear a son and call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. So interestingly enough, that particular prophecy is not about the Messiah. However, Matthew uses it as a prophecy of the Messiah. Because if you go to Matthew 1:20 through 23, it says, behold, a virgin will conceive and bear a son and call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. And this was given to us by the prophet. So Matthew uses this so this is one of these dual prophecies. And by the way, Isaiah is full of them. A prophecy of something that's going to happen now, and then the same prophecy talks about something that's going to happen later. This is one of those prophecies. And then he says, so before the child is old enough to choose between right and wrong, these two nations that are going to bother you won't be there, won't be a threat anymore. So let's go back to 2 Kings and let's see what happens when this all happens. So in 2 Kings chapter 2 Chronicles 28. By the way, when you study the book of Isaiah, you kind of keep your finger in like 4 different books: Micah, 2 Chronicles, 2 Kings, and Isaiah, because there's stuff going on in all the books that are going to tell you what's happening in Isaiah. And so in 2 Chronicles chapter 28, you see what happened. And we don't have time to read through all this, but what happens is the king of Aram and King Rezin, they attack. And they kill 120,000 of Judah's soldiers. And they capture 200,000 people. And this may be the most interesting captivity story of any I've ever heard before. So what happens is they take these 200,000 captives and they take them north. They take them to Samaria. Lots of plunder, and they take 200,000 people. That even getting that many people from Judah to Samaria is a big deal. Take all these people back, and this prophet comes out, and he says, "What are you doing? Why did you capture these 200,000 people and bring them back? Aren't they your brothers and sisters from Israel?" And they say, "Well, but we won the battle. It's okay to do it." And he said, "No. And no, I want you to take them all back." And so 4 guys organize this big food and clothing drive, get clothes and get food for all these people, and take them back to Jericho, from which they can go back to Judah. And that's how God ends up rescuing 200,000 people that are from his country, or from the nation of Judah. But it wouldn't have had to happen in the first place if God had, or if Ahaz had believed what God had sent him. The last part of this, of this conversation that he's having with Isaiah, is about Assyria. And he says, starting in verse 17 in back to Isaiah 7, "The Lord will bring things on you, your nation, and your family, unlike anything since Israel broke away from Judah. He will bring the king of Assyria upon you." And he says, that day the Lord will whistle for the army of southern Egypt and for the army of Assyria. They will swarm around you like flies and bees. They will come in vast hordes and settle in the fertile areas, in the desolate valleys, caves, and thorny places. On that day the Lord will hire a razor from beyond the Euphrates River, the king of Assyria, and use it to shave off everything, your land, your crops, and your people. So this is what God finally has to end up doing. Just a couple things as we close, because we're down toward the end. If we go to the next slide, Monica, the last slide. So one of the things that God says to Ahaz in the beginning is, "If you trust me, if you obey me, things will work out." So we all know the hymn, right? When we walk with the Lord in the light of his smile, what a treasure, and it goes on, but the song is "Trust and Obey." So what is the link, if any, between trust and obedience? Hey, Johnny. And then, do you have a comment? Okay.
I think it's knowing God. You don't trust a person that you don't know. And it's so easy. It was easy for me studying this lesson to think this guy is completely crazy. God, it says here in verse 7, the sovereign Lord says, "It will not take place. It will not happen." I mean, what else do you need? He is saying, he is sovereign. He's saying it's not going to happen. And he didn't know God. He didn't trust God, because how can he obey? And he preferred something more palpable. It's
right.
Politically, okay, I have these 2 countries against me. That country is their enemies. Let me go to their enemies, make an alliance there, and then I'll be fine. It'll be okay. And exactly what he thought would be his salvation was his ruin, because he decided to go. But before we are so fasting, condemning him, this is what we do as well. Because so many times it's hard to walk with the Lord. If it was easy, we all would be all the time. It's hard to walk all the time with the Lord. And if we don't know him, we will not feel, okay, I can trust because he said this. And we may ask, and I ask myself, okay, but the prophet said, God is saying this. I don't have a prophet saying to me all the time, okay, do this is the right thing. But we have the Bible, we have a prophet too. So we have no excuses to do whatever we want to do, right? So.
And I think that's a really good point. I think 2 points that you made that really sort of resonate. One is that you have the Bible, you have your relationship with God, so you have a set of principles. You may make mistakes in applying those principles, but if you follow God's will, then God is going to work things out for you, right? What does Paul say? All things work together for them who love God and who are called according to his purpose, right? So if you're following in God's way, if you're following his principles, he's going to work things out even if we make mistakes. But this wasn't a mistake from Ahaz, right? Ahaz was like, I'm going to do what I want to do and I don't really care. Because you're right, I don't know this God. I mean, even though he grew up in Jotham's first 20 years of his life, he grew up in a home that followed God. Evidently, didn't ever become really part of him. Didn't become part of who he was. Yes, August, we have.
I think about, that, but I think about today. Look around you. Your church is almost empty. The devil is active. He is trying to destroy the Christian with the virus. I mean, he uses everything that's possible to destroy faith in God and trust. And I think it's happening right now with us. People are afraid to go to church. They're afraid to go out and meet with their neighbors. The devil is working, and he's, I hope he isn't winning at this point because we're not showing up in church and we're having private Christianity at home. But I think about that, what he's doing to us right now.
Yeah, I am concerned about that as well. And I think as a church we need to be thinking about that is what happens as the virus wanes and vaccinations are people all going to be coming back? And I think the answer is no. So I think we have to think about how we help bring people back, because a lot of people have gotten out of the habit of, I can find, as much as I appreciate Mike and Diego and their sermons, I can get on the line and listen to Carlton Bird if you like, if you want to hear preaching, or if you want to hear Dwight Nelson. I can get on the line and hear those people every single Sabbath. And these guys are the, quote, superstars of preaching. I can't get fellowship. And that's what has wounded my heart about the whole COVID thing, is haven't had the fellowship. So that's, I think that's something that Satan's using. I think the last thing we want to talk about in the few minutes we have left is what happens when we are threatened. Do you do what Ahaz did? Remember, go back and read this, that the hearts of the king and his people trembled with fear like trees shaking in a storm. Have you ever been threatened by anything, financially, physically, job loss, whatever? How did you respond when you feel threatened? I used to have a boss. We'll call him Sam. That's not his real name. I don't even like to say his name because he's such a nasty human being. He's the only person I know that when he dies, no one will show up at his funeral or they won't be sad. We had a division in our company with 24 hospitals. And in a 4-year period, he fired 26 CEOs out of 24 hospitals. So some hospitals more than once, right? So that's a serious amount of, and it wasn't because he was good or because he demanded high standards. It's just because he was a mean, nasty human being. And every time he came to town, or if he'd call me on the phone, I could feel my blood pressure rise 20 points. My heart rate would go 15, 20 beats higher. He would call me at 10 o'clock at night. I mean, and he'd call me. He lived in Nashville, and we were in Spokane, so there was 2 hours difference. He'd get to work in the morning, get to his office at 7, and pick up the phone and start calling his CEOs out in the West Coast and start screaming at them at 5 o'clock in the morning. Nothing quite like waking up to the sound of your boss screaming at you. Just, set your day just right at a whole different level. And so what would happen when I felt threatened? Heart rate went up, blood pressure went up, worry went up, stomach acid, all that stuff. But what is God telling us in chapter 7 in Isaiah when we feel threatened? What's the response? What could have been my response other than, I'm going to die? What could have been my response? What can be our response when we're threatened? Who wants to tackle that? Back here, August.
We can pray for him, pray for the situation, and turn our thoughts to God immediately. Not wait until the heart raises and stomach issues and all the rest. We can turn to God immediately. And we need to continue that with everything we do in life. Turn to God initially, think his thoughts about the situation.
Put it in his hands.
Put it in his hands, yeah.
Thank you. I think that's a great response because, because I would turn to God, but it would be after about 2 hours after me stewing and worrying and, this guy's coming next week and this, and then God, okay, you got to help me through this, instead of saying, okay, God, Sam's on the phone. You know what that means. You know this is just going to be a very difficult next 45 minutes, but to walk me through this. So thank you for that. I think that's really, really important. Yes.
Yeah, first of all, you shouldn't be scared like that. That's the first. For me, if you are scared of it is what it is. If you're making the best, if you are making your best on God, and you are on your path, you are following everything that you should be doing, you shouldn't be scared. You should be trusting in God. If you are scared, then you are putting your faith or everything on something else then. So for me, that's it. I shouldn't be scared. Anything can happen. But peace should be there always because you trust in God, not in a human being.
Right. Great. Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you again for all your participation. As usual, from the book of Isaiah, it's been very relevant to who we are today, what we're doing today. And so to summarize, we have God saying to Isaiah, look, here's the way I want you to walk. To Isaiah saying to Ahaz, here's the way I want you to walk. Ahaz says, yeah, not doing that. Then we have the consequences of what happens. And then we have the promise of Emmanuel. But then we have what happens when we take ourselves out of God's hands. And the Assyrians are coming. So next week we're going to talk about what happens when you do a deal with the devil. Because one of the things that Ahaz did is he said, well, I need an ally against Aram and Israel. I'm going to go get the king of Assyria to be my ally. Not a good choice. So we're going to think about this more next week. We'll talk more about this. But anyway, thank you for your participation and thank you for your thoughts. Let's bow our heads. Lord, thank you for the Sabbath. Thank you for your protection over us. And we ask that, in times of worry and threat, that our first call will be to you. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you. Hope you have a great rest of the Sabbath.